Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. Today we'll look at the DRC question, especially looking at the fall of Goma. It's not the first time it's falling. It happened in 2012. It's happening now in 2025. But signs and symptoms have been showing that this fall could happen sooner than later, especially with the capture of Masisi, Minova, and now Goma. The airport, the internet, all these are down and people are running. The humanitarian crisis at hand is the biggest question. Also the questions around it, is this political? Is this a problem of integration? Or are the minerals in that country at question? Why is M23, out of the 120 rebel groups in that country, still being a sore thumb in that country, especially with everything we're looking at? The summit that was meant to happen today, what fruit would it bear? Why has Angola failed? There was a summit there, but also the summit in Nairobi that happened. Why have they all failed? The peace deal was anchored on two areas. One, for Rwanda to be able to get its forces out, but also two, to be able to have a conversation directly with the M23 by the DRC government. But words have been flying around between two presidents, President Tshisekedi and President of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. These words have brought the world to its knees to focus on DRC. Tonight, that's our discussion. Let me get to my panel, and I'll get on my extreme left. Hosting him now as the Chancellor of Makerere University, Dr. Crispus Chiyonga. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Timothy, and good evening, my friend.
Happy New Year, sir, and it's good to have you.
Thank you.
It was a very good conversation that we had down there. You really are in the right place, especially with the linkage you want to do between the academia versus the real market there.
I think that's for another day.
We'll bring that conversation on another day. Coming in also, after being away for a long time, Major General Felix Kulaije, Director of Defense, Public Information at the Ministry of Defense and Veteran Affairs. Good evening, sir, and congratulations.
Good evening, Timothy. It seems you are decepting me.
Happy New Year, General.
Happy New Year to you. And for me, it's indeed happened.
Yes.
Mr. Etiang called me Major General when I was in the brigade yesterday morning. And by sunset, I had become a Major General. So Etiang was prophetic.
I will not continue the other prophecies that were off air. Next to me is Professor Sarah Sari, the director at the Institute of Gender and Development Studies at Makerere University. Good evening, Professor, and it's good to have you back.
Good evening, Timothy, and good evening, our viewers. I'm also happy to be here.
We'll be joined by two other guests who I will introduce as soon as they arrive, and we'll be discussing some patent issues, especially with the escalation there. Let me give you some details before I give you where you'll be able to follow us. One is, even with this happening in Goma, about 7 million people have been displaced. That's a big number there. A huge number has moved into both Uganda and Rwanda, but the accusations between the country's leaders has also got the stem. Countries like the US, China, and Germany have gotten involved. But the death of 17 soldiers is also something that gets us questioning. 13 of them being South African soldiers with SADC there, but also we have our own forces that are in that country. What does this mean for the region of East Africa? What does this mean for Uganda, especially with context of some accusations or allegations being made against us? You can be part of the show. Go to our YouTube channel. Let us know what you think. Drop your comment there. Or use the number 0709 60 25 92 for WhatsApp and text, and we'll be reading your text in a short while. Let me get to General Kulaije. General, you and I have discussed this on different platforms, especially about DRC and Shuja being there. We have an operation that is there. We have a Major General who is there. We have soldiers that have been there. We've been there quite a while now. What are we doing, especially since now this has escalated?
You know, it's always important to appreciate that the DRC is a very big country.
Yes.
That you can both be in the same country and you never meet anywhere. But in this particular case, to answer your question directly, we are in Ituri province. Ituri is exactly west of the Rwenzori. The crisis you are talking about is to the extreme southeast of DRC, and that's bordering Rwanda and eventually Burundi, to the south if you go to Bukavu. What are we doing there? We are pursuing the ADF, and we have been doing a very good job together with the FARDC, the National Armed Forces of Congo. So we have a partnership, and we have been executing an operation, a mutual operation, because ADF had become a menace to the Congolese, displaced them, took over their fields, closed the schools and worshiping places. All these have been opened. The IDPs have been closed because they were nature back in their villages. So that's on that axis we are doing very well. And we have had no issue with the conflict itself of where we are.
When you look at, I know that even at some point M23 fought all the way closer to our border,
Yeah.
and we had to reinforce what was there. How did they leave Ituri to get back to northern Kivu where they are? And now
they close to our border you are talking about wasn't in Ituri. It was in Bunagana, where actually they wanted to ban the road construction equipment. And we had to exchange fire with them. And fortunately, without a cost, they withdrew from us. So, to the best of my knowledge, we have not had any issue with the M23, and actually, as we speak, we may be in a juxtaposition between the FRDC and M23 towards Beni. And because of our presence, I think that's why the M23 has avoided coming up north, directed towards us, and instead they are moving to the south.
Interesting. Let me bring in the Chancellor. Doctor, when you see this situation, that in between 2021 and currently, it has escalated to be as bad as it is right now, what do you make of this escalation, but also what has led to the rise in this insurgency in the last 4 years?
First of all, I want to express my sympathy with our people, the African people who have been caught up in that situation in Goma. Whether they are armed soldiers or civilians, whether they are from Uganda, Rwanda, South Africa, Congo. It's a very unfortunate situation. And all of us, whatever we can do, so that situation will be close and better. I would not say from 2021, I think we need to look at that situation from, I think about 008, 009. Yes, it is escalating, but it has been growing. I think I would like to inform this piece of the video to inform the country that situation has many angles, and the sooner we address all the angles, the sooner we can have a solution. This minute one may say it's between Rwanda and Congo. M23 and Congo. But we should also remember that the entire army put there are already there. They have been there a long time. You have mentioned in your summary so many negative forces. I think you have also mentioned the issue of mineral wealth in that area. So my view is that to sort out that problem is to address it comprehensively. And that will mean all hearts to have the will and get a comprehensive dialogue.
Doctor, you've actually said comprehensive, the different aspects to it. What aspects are those? But also, what comprehensive measure would be there? Because everyone is looking at the elephant from where they're seeing it from. So if I'm touching the tail, this is the elephant. Someone is on the trunk. What comprehensive solution are you talking about?
I mentioned three factors driving that situation. The origin of M23 was how the armed forces of Congo at that time were being managed with lenses which were looking at their own nationals from different areas. These are Congolese, these are Banandi, these are Banyarwanda. The M23 came from a decision which was taken by the authorities in DRC then, that all officers, Congolese officers, but of Rwanda origin, should be disaggregated. If you have 100 officers in Badolite who are Rwandese, but they are in that unit Badolite, they were supposed to be scattered around so that we don't have them around here next to his brother. And these people sensed trouble and ran away from the army and formed the M23.
Doctor, my last question before I come to Professor. President Kagame's last remark that I was watching, especially when he was, President Tshisekedi was making accusations about Rwanda supporting M23. He said, the rebels that came to Uganda are the ones that are part of M23 now. What do you make of such a strong allegation about our country?
Well, my advice to all our leaders is that we should handle this situation calmly. The public accusations will not help us. I think there are things we should talk about in closed rooms, but really addressing the real issues of the situation. I've just given you that story of Congolese of Rwanda origin running away from their own army from M23. I was also told of a story around Goma around that time when citizens of Congo, they would grab their fellow citizen, but who is in Rwanda, and then throw him and say, you go to Rwanda, it's not your country. So the ethnic divide in that area needs to be addressed. When you are in Kishasha, I have brothers there, as you know, who are not there. They don't see the difference between Uganda and Rwanda, maybe sometimes even Kenya. That explains their reaction, the population reaction in Kishasha when things happen in Goma. So we have deep things there.
Doctor, you're not telling me what these deep things are. You keep covering them because the public out there is hoping that we can account to what is deep for us to address or feel part of this conversation. What are these deep things you're talking about? The underlying issues.
Yes, I think that's the first issue. One of us needed to recall our recent history. The colonialists, when they came, they just divided us amongst themselves. I've just given myself an example. We, the Banandi, the Bakonzo people in Uganda, we are 1 million. The Banandi in Congo are over 5 million. But me, I'm Ugandan, the other people are Congolese. You see? And that also happened in the case of the Rwandese. They are Rwandese who are Congolese by birth. They are also Rwandese who are Rwanda citizens. But they are brother and sister. They are the same. So if you don't handle them properly, and you don't, that's why in the NRM we are pushing for integration. That's disregarded these divisions by the colonialists. We are all the same people. So one of the things is looking at each other through the ethnic lens. You are a Rwandese who is Congolese, but some people think you should be in Rwanda. That's the serious. Serious matter. You are Munandi, you are in Uganda, you are Ugandan. Some people think you are Congolese. And they are not just saying in the mouth, even when it comes to service or service delivery, they tend to move in that direction. So that's that question of ethnicity. We should drive for unity despite the ethnicity. After the second point is after the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, that was terrible, all of us know. We lost about 1 million people. Some of the elements who did that are hiding in the DRC, and we have not sorted that. You see, they are there hiding in the bush. We are not talking about them. We are not taking measures to bring them back, and either we have a matoput, we reconcile, or we take people to court. That's fundamental. You can't look at the FDLR in Congo, you don't sort it out, and you think you have sustainable peace.
Okay.
You see?
Thank you very much. Professor Sarr, we have been here, we have discussed DRC, we have talked about the various elements there. In the most recent, there was beheading of people, accusations of Rwanda there. 7 million people have been displaced. Families, there was a family that I was looking at that was talking about this is not the first time they're running from Goma to go into a refugee camp. The humanitarian situation, couldn't this be a pivotal point for us to have a discussion, especially with the different facets that the doctor has spoken about?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Timothy, for that question. I think I also want to buy into what the previous speakers have spoken. And I think because of the multifaceted nature of the problem, you cannot just reduce it to a humanitarian issue. The humanitarian crisis you're seeing is a symptom of a larger problem. For starters, there is no country that has inspired many books written about it like the Congo. Whether you're talking about Congo Inc., King Leopold's Ghost, there are so many books. There are more than 20, 30 books just written. Yes, in the footsteps of Mr. Schultz. There were even others I had here. Of course, there are things like Congolese with Kunde, No Place to Call Home, Africa's World War, Dancing in the Glory of Monsters, Cobalt Red. All of these are speaking to the bloodletting in that place which has been on for generations. Actually, when you even read Frantz Fanon's book, The Wretched of the Earth, We are told by commentators that the inspiration behind the wretched of the earth, in as much as was in Algeria, was what had happened in the Congo. Because Congo had received independence in 1960. The wretched of the earth is authored in 1961. And that's when he begins actually paying attention to the lasting legacy of colonialism by way of dehumanizing the people. So Congo has had many problems. And unfortunately, every successful historical epoch introduces and compounds the problems. It does not resolve the problem. It just simply adds on. You have the first humanitarian crisis occurring at colonization, where people are pushed into the rubber farms. If you don't produce the rubber quota, the hands go, the legs go, the children go. So that was indeed a humanitarian crisis and a grave human rights abuse. Successive regimes that have come from that have also just continued this humanitarian crisis, but in different names. But of course, now that we have international media, the scale can be appreciated. We now know there are millions displaced, and these new millions displaced are not exclude the old millions displaced. Every town in Kampala today, in Uganda today, has Congolese refugees. They form part of our biggest refugee population. If you are to go to places like Nachivale, Oruchinga, Chaka, you have a lot of Congolese people there. So there's a serious humanitarian crisis. But I think focusing on the humanitarian crisis alone and forgetting the fundamental issues that are causing this conflict will be a problem. All the books that have been written about Congo relate to its resource curse or the fact that it has lots of minerals. Whoever has gone as an actor in the Congo is partly inspired because of that. Of course, we've been having, I think a few years ago, they introduced conflict-free mining contracts. Those are not about to resolve the matter. You have the area controlled by lots of vigilante forces to try, because again, the world order of mineral resource exploitation is not fair to Africans. So you find those on the ground also trying to exert control over the few mining fields in their way. And this, of course, comes with a lot of violence and a lot of exploitation and a lot of gender-based violence and exploitation. So economic. So I think we cannot just reduce the issue of Congo to the issue of the humanitarian crisis. You have to look at the fundamental issues they have talked about. One is it's a failed project in nation building. It's a very big country with very many ethnicities. And I think ever since they have received independence, the wars have raged. I think also the world is not interested in having a peaceful Congo. Some of the books I mentioned actually speak to that. So as a result, the leaders in the DRC will always struggle at nation building. And of course, that comes with some areas being seen as marginalized. It's a vast country with vast natural resources, but also with the vast impediments in terms of a lot of forests, big rivers. So putting infrastructure will always be a challenge to crisscross that country and bring it under one call. But the country has to start at a project of nationalism and national identity. And of course, then that also has to be coupled with socioeconomic transformation, economic development. If you don't do all of those and people continue feeling they are marginalized, then the absence of the state in particular areas, you know, nature abhors a vacuum. So where the state retreats from or fails to capture, other authorities will arise. You may call them illegitimate, you may call them vigilantes, but they will still be the legitimate force that will bring people under control. And because they are not the legitimate stakeholders, of course, they may sometimes exert excessive forces of violence to bring people to order. So this crisis may continue. I think we are just seeing different theaters coming up. But the issues in the Congo are very fundamental. But hopefully we can use the humanitarian crisis, and the world can use the humanitarian crisis to try and bring order. But we also know that when the world comes into the Congo, they're also not coming with a clean heart. Today you saw the number of white fighters that have surrendered to the M23 who were in the Congo. Maybe they were invited officially by the government. But we also know how many whites are operating there illegitimately, by the way, to extract a lot of resources. So, and of course, thereafter, we've had a very long UN peacekeeping force, MONUSCO, for a long time, more than 2 decades, but still this bloodletting and violence occurs. So the question is, what are they really doing there? Of course, it will be followed by the special envoy for DRC, the UN special envoy, who will go around. The day she will be around, there will be a lot of peace. And after she goes, hell will break loose. So the humanitarian crisis is deplorable. It is embarrassing and it's very sad. We feel with the people who are going through that and with the Congolese who have been denied peace. But we hope the world can use the humanitarian crisis to try and address the fundamental issues within the Congo. Because until those fundamental issues are addressed, these different theaters of war will continue occurring. Thank you.
And I'm glad, sticking with you before I introduce Dr. David, who has just joined us. When you talk about the humanitarian crisis and you talk about the issues that are there, the challenge is we had SADC join in there. It's not the first time they're being there. They were there in the 90s, especially in 96, 97, around there. You also look at the ESC force was in there. The US has been interested in bringing a force there. When you look at all these forces and look at the East African community and look at the AU, being toothless in such a situation, isn't it an indictment to this community and also to the AU for failing to support what you call a failed project of nation building?
I think to an extent you're right. And it's not just an indictment. In some cases, it is even an accusation of being party to the conflict. We know that the US had a lot of mining contracts under Mobutu Sese Seko, so they cannot be a neutral force in that place. Of course, East African Standby Brigade went there as a neutral force, but now two of us are being accused of being behind M23. One group says it's Rwanda, Rwanda says it's Uganda. The truth is somehow, somewhere inside there. So that is one. And of course, the other countries were all AU forces, and whoever has gone in the Congo has not necessarily, apart from maybe Uganda and Rwanda who claim to be there for peace building, others come, of course, to shoulder the legitimate government, but we know that there have been accusations of people being interested in the Congo. Remember when we had Africa's World War for the minerals that are there. So it is an unfortunate state, but I think we need to continue trying to bring all the actors to book, especially under the sphere of the African Union. So it is an indictment that this has blown up when they are there, but we cannot stop there. There has to be a discussion of who are the perceived actors and what can we do about that. But of course, given that the UN has been toothless for such a very long time, we hope that the African Union can do better. Thank you.
Shots fired, but we'll take them as they have come in. Dr. David Ngendo Simba, also the head of Center for African Studies at Uganda Matters University. Thank you for joining us this evening. Good evening.
Good evening and thanks.
Let's start it off in the first gear. Politics, integration, minerals. What is this escalation all about?
Thank you, Timothy, and I would like to thank my fellow panelists. I think it is important perhaps to state what is the same and what is different.
Yes.
From M23 version 1 to M23 version 2. And I think we get lost if we run with the grammar and the nomenclature, giving us the container and forgetting to kind of decipher what is the content there. And I'd like to start by stating that there is something different from M23 version 1 to M23 version 2. Picking up from my paternal uncle is here. This is my paternal uncle, Honorable Chiyonga, who gave us something of a hint worth really stopping over. When Honorable Chiyonga was at Munyonyo in 2012 in the Kampala talks with my maternal uncle, the late Malumalu. I had two uncles in that room. The Kampala talks of M23 version 1 under the auspices of Uganda, headed by the able leadership of Dr. Chiyonga himself here. The Congolese delegation was headed by the late Malumalu, my maternal uncle. They were discussing a different animal, far different from this current animal. And I want to clarify the two different animals there. we still do not understand its genome and its phenotype, but it has the same phenotype, but its genotype is probably very different. The M23 version 1 is a resulting offshoot of perhaps what CNDP had been. We have a story of how we should get rid of Mobutu. How we should get rid of Mobutu start with the Lemera Accords that eventually bring together, and they call it alliance as well. It's a very interesting word. We have an ADF, which calls itself Alliance of Democratic Forces. A decade before, this ADF became really a menace. There has been also another alliance of democratic forces for the liberation of the Congo. That is the alliance that brought together a potluck of different forces united by one thing: Mobutu must go, and disunited in purpose, so that we do what? Chief among those forces were remnants of those who had already gotten exposed to the war. We started the civil war, post-NRA, getting into Rwanda to eventually put an end to the Habyarimana regime that has gone on into genocide. A very good chunk coming from Kinyarwanda speaking people from the south of Kivu and few from the north, call them the Banyamulenge. But these ones were just from the Itombe Hills. It is that remnant of the force that eventually constitutes the bulk of the Kabila army that led all the way to Kinshasa. Fast forward, we are in 1997, Mobutu has gone, and then we have now Kabila, who is now facing the question of, so Mobutu was the only thing which was uniting us. That's what we do now. You never had, I'm told that at Kisangani there was a moment, two forces, Uganda and contribution to the AFDL, as they call it, was, wait, before you get to Kinshasa, build an army. I remember as I was very young, listening to that recording. There was a recording of President Museveni actually saying, Laurent Kabila, it is now very clear after Kisangani has fallen that we are heading for Kinshasa. But build now an army a la NRA cum UPDF that will be in charge of the state. There were two power glued on us to postpone that. That's a big faux pas. That was the biggest faux pas of where we are. And I want to connect that faux pas to where we are. All the eyes were bracketed to take over Kinshasa. The council of those who have really been in the thick of building a state was ignored. So we get now to Kinshasa, and you have this potluck of forces only yesterday united by one enemy, but disunited in purpose. It is after Kabila is now getting into full consciousness that he is in charge. The next thing is, no, yesterday's allies, because of the allied forces for the liberation of the Congo, were looked at with an ugly eye as foes now. That was the beginning of Laurent Kabila Must Go project. Now, we were duped. The bulk of that force, again, composed of the Kinyarwanda-speaking people of the Congo. Remember, these have been very much around in the post-Lumumba secessionist force. We're talking about 1961 already. What will come to be known as the Mulele force, here, where people call the Simba, had a Kinyarwanda-speaking population there. It is the force that went on to put up a spirited resistance against the Shaba wars when the 70s, Mobutu is getting Belgians, Moroccan, and Eastern European mercenaries. It is the force that eventually put up against, again, the Mobutu's attack, still in Eastern Congo. It's the force that was mobilized to eventually get rid of Mobutu 30 years later. It is the force that will eventually retreat when the Kabila, advised by the new entrance into SADC, ridding himself of yesterday's allies from the Easterners. There is a whole political economy angle to that story, but we can talk about it later. They look to the Indian Ocean as the future of the Congo versus they look to the Atlantic Ocean as the future of the Congo. But quick forward, we get now another showdown that will eventually culminate into the assassination of Kabila in 2001, and then the Joseph Kabila coming in to take over this country, which is really in tatters, already divided for about 3 years between the east of Congo, de facto balkanized politically from the west of the Congo. It is the transition, which was the 1+4 formula. Kabila seeing, reading the conflict for what it is, political violence, and hence political justice as the solution to that. Devising from South African talks and city and so on, a 1+4 arrangement. That arrangement sustained the Congo, seeing it into the first, perhaps the second most democratic experiment in 2006. It was brutally aborted when the question which my uncle here is bringing forward, the question of reforms within the army pertaining to deployment came to the fore. So now that we have gotten institutions of the Republic, there is an entire presidency with the executive, there is the legislature with 2 chambers, there is the judiciary. Now the army too, which is national, supposed to be national in character. So later, they used to call it later, mix up the army. So we no longer have the army which has got this facet of brigades that are territorial and ethnicized. It was a very complicated conversation that eventually led to the armed wing of one of the 4. You remember there has been a rally for the Congolese democracy, RCD. There has been led by the Azarias Ruberwa. There have been MLC, the Movement for the Liberation of the Congo, by Jean-Pierre Bemba. There has been the general opposition by Zaidi Ngomba, and then the Kinshasa regime with Yerodia. It is the CRDC coming from Eastern Congo that said, well, we still have, it's a very fragile transition. We are not sure that the central government, the government is genuine about the unity or is just about to swallow us up. The military wing of the rally for democratic change in the Congo that plugged off, led by Kunda, to refuse that reform that was being tabled in 2007. And we saw the beginning of what we call the CNDP. CNDP calls itself the Congress, the National Congress for the Defense of the People. For the defense of the people. It went on for 2 years. Goma has been taken over by non-state actors before. This is the 3rd episode. The first time is really on the threshold. CNDP reached Munigi on the threshold of the city in 2008. It was only stopped by the then MONUC, the UN peacekeeping forces, literally stopped on orders of Security Council then, which was beyond just speaking. But Goma was really taken over by CNDP. It is the accord that precipitated Kabila to really talk with the rebel that brought in the March 23rd accord that eventually brought him back the brigades of the CNDP into the army. But again, refusing a dislodgement, a deterritorialization. When that accord was eventually aborted, for a couple of reasons which we can go into, we saw M23 coming in. M23 was a reminder of CNDP, the unfinished business of CNDP, which is the unfinished business of the RCD, which is the unfinished business of the political transition of Lawrence Kabila must go. That is the animal of M23-1. a particularly different animal that has particular claims laying on the state. What are those claims? Among the things which I think Honorable Chionga is talking about are two. One is that facts on the ground suggest that the citizenship question in the Congo is ethnicized. That is one. And then two, the nationality question, which are not synonymous. There's a difference between citizenship and nationality. The citizenship is ethnicized. The nationality is biologized. Against those two important facts, the first time when those that question brought its ugly head was in 1972 with Ebisengimana, actually a Rwandan national who ended up becoming the chief of staff of the Mobutu cabinet, influenced the law called the nationality law in 72. The nationality law said that our Congolese, all those found in the Congo by independence, 1960. 1960, that's the Congo independence. The previous law, which was being abrogated by the what's called the 1972 nationality law, was our Congolese, those who were found in the borders of Congo as Leopold's decree of 1885. The Nanda community, the Yira community, put in a spirited fight against that Bisengimana's influenced Mobutu decree of 72. It was the biggest debate. The debate was in the Goma provincial parliament. It went on for a decade, and later in 1981, there was a citizenship law that brought back the colonial law back to the fore. So when I say that citizenship is ethnicized, is that you enter through the Congo, just like many other, and that's the predicament of the African continent. You enter into the relationship with the state through your ethnic, if you like, your tribal homeland. That is the first big problem. The second problem is that nationality now, which is, and you know, the modern state has coupled the nation to the state. That's why we've got a nation state, which is our biggest malaise of our modern times. And perhaps later on I'll be asked to give ways forward, but I'll reserve my way forward to how we should really think of the states. But the nationality now was biologized. You enter into a relationship, you belong to the nation through blood of your father, moreover, biologized through the paternal lineage. Now, it is that problem which has been at the very back of the entire consciousness of those claiming belongingness to the Congo. More so, Kinyarwanda-speaking people who said, we cannot afford, in their wisdom or folly, to leave the only remaining place which you can call home and get into this assemblage that cannot guarantee our future. That was the beginning of M23.
Now, part two, this one.
Now, part 2. Now, version 2, we see something that happens in 2012. In 2012 toward December 2013, the talks are going on. In 2013, a balance of force changes on the ground, and there is a military defeat of the M23. There has been a military defeat of the M23 with the whole Chanzu's attack, which was coupled with a political failure. So there's been a military defeat, and that military defeat just swept under the carpet the Kampala talks, under the auspices of Honorable Chionga there. And everyone took leave. The Kinshasa government, the victorious militarily, just took leave of that. And we saw the talks which were really leading us to the political solution just being aborted by a very quick fix of a military victory. M23 went into the limbo. It went on, Kabila eventually dragged on.
Military victory which was funded.
Which was very much externalized. Yeah, it's a very externalized military victory. I think that's a very important footnote to add there. It went into the limbos, eventually disoriented. That is what gives a kind of impetus towards these accusations are coming here because most of the bulk of the forces ended up in these refugee camps here, transitioned to Uganda, disarmed here, taken up to different camps from the Kisoro to elsewhere, up to the northern Uganda. Sometime when I was doing research in the north, in the camps, I found remnants of them 23, and so on and so forth. We went into a limbo phase. It's not like the animal was done away with altogether, but just that the animal was so much perhaps drugged that it couldn't have any other effect. We see a rapprochement. Tshisekedi coming to power. Tshisekedi is sworn in 2018. Tshisekedi says, I want to do not more of the same. I want to dare something different. We see some particular courage from the Kinshasa establishment to look at the East as another way of engagement now. We see we saw the Kampala Kinshasa summits, business summit taking place here. We saw visas being, the talks about the visas abrogations. We saw even the Congo through the executive, without the parliament really pushing for the Congo to enter East Africa. A rapprochement unprecedented that eventually brought to how do we deal perhaps with the Kisangani hangover of the dates. ICJ had already made this very clear. We saw the roads as one way perhaps of pursuing, Uganda's pursuing its economic interests and doing business for peace kind of approach. It is intriguing and worth also considering that it is at a time when we see the signing of the route Uganda to Goma, all the way, Bunagana of Uganda to Goma. We see our place here, Bodo Lubiria up to Butembo. We see Odaramachako up to Bunia. It is when we are talking about all that all rapprochement, a Kampala that is very much in bed with Kinshasa. We see Suja coming up here. We are dealing with ADF with bare knuckles. And it was 2 weeks after the signing, Makio, of that whole thing. And a week after the announcement of the removal of the visa regime, that M23 starts. Historical coincidence or the tree that is hiding the forest? I don't know.
Very interesting that the tree hides the forest. Let me come to Major General Felix Kulaije. What, as the military, as the UPDF, what does this mean to you, especially the security of the region and the security of our country? I think when it was in Bunagana, there was even less screening because of the numbers of people that were coming into the country. What does this mean for security for us? What does it mean for security for the region?
Before I answer your question directly, I would like to pick from where it has ended. First of all, express my displeasure that he has left the tree without mentioning it. Because on this panel, the two of us are not free to mention beyond what he has said. The two of them, as scholars, could. And that would have helped the analysis. But unfortunately, he has said the tree in the forest, in the bush. So that's a debt to you, sir.
Dr. David will tell us where the tree is.
Two, I wanted to give you, he brought in the historical perspective, which was very correct. But he left out another 2 components, 2 issues that cannot be ignored in this conflict. There was a mini genocide in 1965. Again, an attempt to disenfranchise the Kinyarwanda speakers in Eastern Congo. What you talked about, the 72 law, was an attempt to correct. It was an after effect of what had happened in 1965. 2, if you may recall, there was a genocide against the Banyamulenge in 2006, 2007. We had thousands of refugees who fled here at that time. And a good number of them were assisted by IOM to go to Canada. Now, as you are dealing with that, then you have what you have mentioned of the Rorang Kunda group. So you have the Banyamulenge, that was suppressed, then the Banyamasisi. So the current conflict, M23 are talking about, are the Banyamasisi in northern Kivu. I mean North Kivu. So what are these pointing to? I would like to state that these conflicts in Congo are actually categorized into two. They are resource conflicts and ethnic conflict. Or identity conflict. So the ethnicization is talking about, that's the identity. People who are being told you are non-citizens. And you have heard words like go back to where? Now, interestingly, in the run-up to the peace process you have referred to where Honorable Chiyonga was chairing, we had eminent persons trying to help in resolving the conflict in Eastern Congo. You remember Nelson Mandela? After him, was it Mandela first or Nyerere? Nyerere first. And Nyerere is on record to have said this is a colonial problem and you cannot tell people to go away unless you are saying they are going with the territory. And I thought that was clear to the parties interested, but they seem to have ignored it for reasons I'm yet to know. Two, you cannot address the Congo conflict unless, like you put it in your remarks, you dealt with the question of who is controlling the resources in Congo. There are areas in Congo where a black man is not even allowed to reach. In this country, which is in Africa here. And you mentioned the MONUSCO, the UN. Since 1960, has anybody questioned why that problem has not ended? Despite the last version of the process, or rather effort of the UN being the most expensive UN operation since UN history, since the beginning of the United Nations. These are issues that should attract interest for investigation. Unfortunately, given my dress, I cannot divulge in what delve into addressing these issues. Otherwise, I may cause a diplomatic incident. But to your question, as UPDF would wish to see peace in Eastern Congo, because the construction of roads was not just a approachment, it was a pursuit of economic interests. That Ugandan businessmen, that the market for Uganda is actually Eastern Congo. And so, if you want to exploit that market, you must deal with infrastructure. Because as you know, the infrastructure are the blood veins of business or commerce. But as construction starts, M23 emerges, as you put it. That's a matter of interest that, again, I cannot discuss freely, as I said earlier. But we have done our part of ensuring the safety of the Ugandans on this side of the border. That does not make us sit and relax. So for Dr. Chiyonga and the Uganda government in general to have put efforts at that time, it was a manifestation of how serious we are about the stability in Eastern Congo. And for me, in my understanding, I was not informed, but in my understanding, the choice of Dr. Chiyonga was based on what you have just told us. He has relatives across the border. He was a Minister of Defense. He understood these matters of security better than any other person. And so he was a resource that the conflicting parties should have exploited to the maximum. Fast forward, the current phase, the East African Community Heads of States Summit did see a way forward as another attempt at the Dr. Chiyonga approach of a political settlement. So, erect an interventionist force, create a ceasefire, and then peace talks go on. So the mandate of the East African Intervention Force, ECRAF, as the acronym was to actually create an enabling environment for political discussions. It's history. When it came to 8th of December 2023, the force was told to pack and go. Because, in the words of Kinshasa government, we were supposed to fight M23. And that was contrary to the mandate the head of state summit had given us. In my humble view, that's when the golden opportunity of dealing with the M23 question was lost.
The implications of security of the region.
You see, we live in a conflict-prone region. You have the Sudan conflict system, the Horn of Africa conflict system, and the Great Lakes conflict system. These three feed on each other. Once you have a conflict in one of the three regions, it will spill over to other conflict systems. You have been dealing with the Horn of Africa. You are not even home and dry. You see what's happening in Ethiopia. You see what's happening in Somalia. You have seen what is happening in Sudan, the Sudan. You see what's happening in Central African Republic. I think there are about 3 or 4 sets of forces in Central African Republic, peacekeeping. Is there peace in Central Africa? Now, for us, the concern is that now you have a corridor for terrorism from the Sahel through Chad, Central Africa, down south, and linking up with the IS and Al-Shabaab in Somalia. It's just like you are following the Rift Valley, the eastern arm and the western arm. So this is a serious matter. So anything that threatens the stability in any of the member states around here creates room for those negative forces, as Dr. called them, or the enemies of peace, if I may use that word, that are going instead to exacerbate or to make the situation go from bad to worse.
Thank you very much. Doctor, lastly, before we take a break, you were at the forefront, just like Dr. David told us, of peace talks, especially to bring peace in DRC. But even fast forward to August last year, where there were peace talks in Angola. Why are peace talks fading to bring peace in this country? Or are we talking too much and doing less?
Okay, first a correction. My participation in the talks on Congo were a directive from President Museveni. He was the one deploying me. President Museveni was the facilitator appointed by his colleagues in the ICGLR. So I was his hands on that situation. I think the crisis we face in Africa is of, I would call it inappropriate formations to deal with our crisis when they come. For example, if you look at AU has worked very hard on paper to form regional forces. On paper, we have regional forces. We have even, I think, a quick intervention force when there is a quick situation which needs us to move in. But AU, in terms of taking action, cannot take action except with the UN Security Council authorizing. Very long journey, and we don't move effectively. These situations, particularly in the Great Lakes region, can be handled if we have the right formations. You will recall, again, that situation around Goma. We had this MONUSCO who are still there. They would sit on the side and people are being killed. That time, fortunately for the region, President Museveni was the chairman of ICGLR. So he used that position, working with his colleagues, and say, let's form a special intervention brigade to deal with this situation. And for that time, we had some peace coming into the place. So my biggest worry is the formations which lead us to solve these problems. And let me salute President Tshisekedi. Tshisekedi has come to power in Congo, in my view, with an open heart. He is someone, when he came, he was participating in meetings, he was visiting his colleagues whenever there was a problem. So of recent, like these talks which were supposed to be in Nairobi, it was, I will go, I will not go. I don't know what is changing his attitude. These issues in East Africa, in the Great Lakes region, are solvable. Once the political will is there on the part of our leaders. DRC, you know, the GDP of DRC, as we speak now, is smaller, I think, than the Uganda, despite the resources, because the GDP is the soluble wealth. There is so much wealth in Congo, resources, but this doesn't show up in the actual GDP of the country. So I see really a dilemma myself. I see a dilemma. The formations AU doesn't seem to be helping us. ICGLR has gone quiet. East African community is active, but is not linking properly with SADC, because SADC is also a player, because DRC is both a member of East African community and also a member of SADC. I think I'll leave it there to say, because it's not an open thing for discussion on the TV. I think the patriots need to go back to examine the structures we have and really seize them and see how we use them to deal with the situation. Because, Timothy, the issue is not just is Uganda safe. Uganda cannot be safe if Africa is not safe. That's our position. If there are continuous problems in the Sudan, in the Congo, wherever they are on the African soil, they hurt Africa and any other part of the continent. So our drive is to work for peace. That's why we are in Somalia. Somalia is not as near as DRC, but our children are there. They have been dying, but they've made a difference. So our task is not yet done. We have to keep searching, scratching our heads to see how we link up with our colleagues on the continent to have formations that will help us. These MONUSCO people should have left yesterday.
Let's come back. Let's come back to that one. The Chancellor is saying and not saying things, but he has said them. James Othieno from Toro says, I'm watching live, but we know that Uganda and Rwanda are causing the war because they want to steal minerals and they are acting to bring peace in Congo. Okay? Thank you for your message. Another one comes in here and says, the issue of the regional security, especially the current conflict in DRC, should be treated as a threat to global peace initiatives by the UN Security Council. Rwanda and Uganda should stop interfering with the sovereignty of DRC. Imagine 7 rebel groups joining in a battle to fight out M23. This may escalate into a regional conflict, with Congo taking up arms against Rwanda or Uganda. It's just a matter of time. Okay? Someone else continues and says, good evening, Timothy. Congratulations to Afande Kulaije on the promotion. The problem of Congo with Rwanda's peoples existing there was formed long time ago. This saw Mobutu wanting to scapegoat it and having them in the constitution in the 70s, persecuting their leaders in some of the areas. This saw them becoming rebels to protect themselves, formations of FDLR, and the same continued during the desire Laurent Kabila to now to also Joseph Kabila, the formation of the RDC, then the CNDP, General Nkunda, to M23. So the problem of identity and seeking statehood is one of the biggest ones. And let us not forget the ugly conflict between the Hema and the Lendu also. Africa needs to seek African solutions to their seeing problems. Hague, New York, Paris, and Brussels do not have our interests. Haguma Ivan from Kisoro. Thank you. Very well put. Thank you for the show. My name is Daniel from Kirenga district. I want to know from General Kulaije, if our Ugandans doing business in Congo are secure. Really, we are worried about our brothers and sisters there. Thank you. I would like to hear feedback there. The General has got that one. Thank you for the good program. My question is, don't you think Uganda is not safe? What measures are being put to guarantee peace and security of Ugandans? This is Bernard. Okay. Finally, before we take a break, this is Lawrence. He says, okay, Russia, America, China are the biggest and the strongest countries on the planet, but DRC is a small country. It has never been able to have peace because of superpower countries that have interests in stealing its minerals and develop their countries. Thus, DRC is suffering. Okay. Keep the messages coming. Number is 0709 60 25 92, both text and WhatsApp. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be discussing solutions to DRC.
Here's your chance to win school fees for your child for a whole year. Just pay school fees using Momo. Dial *165 *80#. Select option 2 for school pay. Select option 1 to pay school fees. Enter the student number and amount and approve the transaction. You will now enter the draw to win school fees.
This is Uganda in 1986 and now. In 1986, the total hydropower generation in the country was a paltry 60 megawatts, generated from the old and dilapidated Owen Falls hydropower station from River Nile in eastern Uganda. The power station had been commissioned in 1954 to generate 150 megawatts. Old age and lack of spare parts led to frequent mechanical breakdown. By 1986, the station could barely run for 6 hours non-stop. As such, daily load shedding affected every important installation, such as State House in Entebbe, National Referral Hospital Mulago, Makerere University, among others. Today, the country boasts of at least 20,800 megawatts generated from at least 5 power stations. This is Uganda in 1986 and now. This is Uganda in 1986 and now. By end of 1986, only 5 international commercial airlines were landing at Entebbe International Airport, and not on a regular basis. These included the British Airways, Sabena, KLM, and Lufthansa. Today, that number has doubled. By end of 2024, at least 10 international commercial airlines were landing or taking off at Entebbe International Airport daily, the newly reborn Uganda Airlines being the newest of all. The Uganda Airlines was reborn in 2018, although started flying the following year in 2019. Today, the national carrier has a fleet of 6 planes, which included CJR 9000 Bombardier, Airbus A320, Airbus A330-800, and Boeing B7879. This is Uganda in 1986 and now. This is Uganda in 1986 and now. In 1986, inflation rate was recorded at a whopping 240.5%, which was the highest rate ever in the history of the country. In January 2024, inflation was, according to the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, UBOS, recorded at 2.6%, which was the lowest ever in the history of the country, and also one of the lowest in the world. This is Uganda in 1986 and now. This is Uganda in 1986 and now. In 1986, when the NRM government came to power, there were only about 1,200 kilometers of roads tarmacked in the entire country. By the end of 2024, there are more than 6,000 kilometers of tarmacked roads connecting the country border to border. Bitumization of roads in Uganda started with the tarmacking of the Entebbe-Kampala Highway shortly after the World War II had ended in 1945. This is Uganda in 1986 and now. This is Uganda in 1986 and now. In 1986, when the National Resistance Movement came to power, there were only 7 commercial banks that were operational. Besides, there were other 4 credit institutions, including Centenary Rural Development Bank, that is now Centenary Bank, having been granted a license to operate as a commercial bank in 1992. By end of 2024, there were 26 commercial banks operational across the country. Before 1986, banking hours lasted between 8:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. This had been so since 1907, when commercial banking started in Uganda. In October 1987, the NRM government extended banking hours from 8:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. It was further extended to 5 p.m. weekdays, Saturday and Sunday, half a day. This is Uganda in 1986 and now.
Welcome back from that quick commercial break here on Behind the Headlines as we get to the last leg of the show. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. In the studio, I'm joined by Professor Sarah Sali, Dr. David Ngendo, and Major General Felix Kulaije, and finally, the Chancellor of Makerere University, Dr. Crispus Chiyonga. And we're discussing the DRC question. A lot has been given to us, especially from the historical perspective to where we are, and especially if you look at 1.0 and 2.0 of M23, we have an understanding of where we are. But let me read these 2 messages and then we'll jump into a discussion of solutions. Greetings to the panel. This is Honorable John Ken Luchamuzi, the man. He says the current parliament has not exhausted the debate on why UPDF is still in DRC. In the 6th Parliament, when I realized the data that UPDF had entered DRC without parliamentary permission, no one believed me, but soon or later, government accepted my facts and apologized. Our continued stay in DRC is not explainable. Okay. Ayebare Cosma says in Bunga says, I think the East African community should act to help Congo. Out of this, if there is enough evidence that M23 is backed by Rwanda, why can't the community sanction Rwanda until its force is retreated? Otherwise, there is no reason whatsoever why the Congolese should suffer because of the interest of a small human population there. Thank you a lot. I think I'm going to jump to General Kulaije. General, this news that has come in, is it true? The news coming in is that breaking news, Intelligence Security Organization Director General Oluka has passed on.
He was rushing home to join the family for prayers, because every evening they said the rosary together. And as he was getting home, he collapsed. Rushed to hospital, only to be declared dead on arrival.
Very sad.
Sad indeed.
And I would like to jump into the show right now just to pay our tribute to him. And yes. I will start with the Chancellor, who also knows him very well. I'll get to the General, I'll get to Dr. David, and then I'll get to Professor, paying our tribute to General Luka. Over to you, Chancellor.
Well, very
your
sad
memory.
News, very sad news that we've lost that brother. Very, very sad, big loss. We stand with the family. We stand with the leadership of the country, President Museveni, that we've lost this brother. May his soul rest in peace.
Thank you very much. General Kulaije.
For me, it's personal. I trained with the General Luka in 1994. We did a VIP course together. Very amiable. Quite easy on his feet. And later, how President Museveni picked him to head the ISO was unknown to many of us. But the few years he has led ISO, he had taken a totally different trajectory, where you are seeing now if cohesion between security agencies in operations, in training. Even training, we have been training with the ESO staff, especially at advanced levels, officer cadet and other militarily grounded courses, to have, because to instill discipline, they needed to have the infusion of the UPDF discipline. And he initiated these programs. He was successful in ensuring this. It is sad, in my view, ISO was taking root into where we are feeling very proud that it is now implementing its mandate effectively. And here the man goes.
Very sad.
We join the family. I personally know the family, both the wife and the children. My heart goes to them. We can only say it's God who can console them better. Our words are not sufficient.
Thank you very much. Dr. David.
Well, at this particular material moment when the region is really on the brink of some continental hellfire, losing an army officer of that caliber, I will not claim to have known him very well.
Dr. Name General, an army officer is a colonel and below.
Oh, this is another
He was a general.
Thank you so much for that correction.
Yes.
I mean, we can't cry any much, given that generals understand that war is too serious a matter to be left to just the army alone, and these are the people who could have really lent us some deep counsel and deep viewpoints as we navigate. Almost Uganda is really the conflict quadrangle. Sudan is not holding. Ethiopia is still in the hangover. Somalia has not held up yet. South Sudan is in tatters. the DRC here, the West Sea Territories, and here we are.
The Sudan.
Of course, the Sudan. So our condolences to really the family, and may the Lord take us through this very trying moment really of cry across the region.
Thank you very much. Professor Sarah Sally.
Thank you very much, Timothy. It is indeed very sad news. I didn't know him much, but from the pictures, he's still a very young person. It was not his time, but of course, God knows better. He rose at the time when there were so many rumors of intelligence reports being concocted. We don't know whether they were true, but there were allegations. Ever since he rose up to that position, we stopped hearing the allegations. We don't know the truth, but what we know is we are able to be here, we are able to sleep and wake up because of the robust nature of the intelligence the state has to work with. Of course, we know the things which happen in the region find their way internal, and then they find us also internally disgruntled, and sometimes the temptations to do wrong things is there. But we are able to be here, we are able to breathe, we are able to partake. Uganda is, Kampala is East Africa social capital because of the correctness of the intelligence we have, and it's being worked upon. So we have really lost a great resource. And as I said, he seemed to be very young and not yet his time, but God knows better. So like all the others, we condole with the family. We pray that he has eternal rest. But most especially, our sympathies go to the family, but also to the state of the Republic of Uganda to train such a resource to such a level. And then this happens. I mean, these are acts of God, but it's not really the right time, especially given that every day we are not sure where we stand in terms of intelligence. It looks like bad people are always around us. So we pray that his successor will take the work seriously. I know they will. Uganda government prides in correct intelligence. We pray that this will be taken up seriously, and we shall have a right successor. But other than that, we condole with the state, with the family, the extended family, the clan, the region, and we commit all to God. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as a station, our tribute and condolences go out to the family. Very trying time, both for the UPDF, the family and friends. And I pray that the Lord will comfort you in this trying time. Let's get into our conversation. Professor, let me come back to you. President Paul Kagame has come out and said, we are ready for war. President Felix Tshisekedi has come out and said, I will not talk to the M23 terrorists. The US new Secretary of State has come out and called the President of Rwanda and said, ceasefire. When you look at the global gymnastics and you look at both the presidents that are at hand, what do you see playing out here? And how do we get a breakthrough?
That's a very difficult one. I should have gone to David. But
his is waiting.
Yeah, I think also what happens is, I think the two panelists have alluded to it. You know, the balkanization which comes with colonialism divides up these communities. So he talked about biological citizenship, ethnic citizenship, and biological belonging. The fact that for me, I don't believe that they came and then they went and they were there. I believe there was a region which was occupied by these people. And they get divided up. Some end up in Uganda, some end up in DRC, some end up in Rwanda. And because there are Tutsi groups in all these three countries. Whether you call them Banyamulenge or they call them Banyarwanda here, you call them Tutsis in Rwanda. So there will always be, and that's where, you know, nations differ from the state. Because the state is about geographical territory and the monopoly of legitimate forms of violence. So the state will have its army, it will have its logos, it will have its coat of arms, flags, and everything. Nationhood is more a connection through blood, okay? So there being a physical state boundary does not stop the nation overrunning the state. And that's why when some countries where the nation and the state fuse, we talk about nation states. So you can talk about France as a nation state because what classifies it to be French is also what classifies the territorial boundaries. When they talk about Germany and things like that. But you see, when you come in Africa where these artificial boundaries are, okay, maybe the other example I can give is like the Kurds. You'll find the Kurds in Iran, you'll find the Kurds in Turkey, you'll find the Kurds everywhere. Because And that's the struggle for Kurdistan, because they think they are one people by blood and therefore who deserve to be governed in one way, so that they are well understood with laws that apply to them, national language, identity, etc., etc. And you see how that has been fought here. So you now have another issue here, where you have people who are biologically the same. They were divided by the creation of the states in this Great Lakes region, okay? And so if they identify as Congolese, the Banyamulenge, then they should show more loyalty to Tshisekedi, to the Kinshasa regime. How about then when they feel the Kinshasa regime is marginalizing them because of not being Congolese enough? Because you see, the issue is human beings will always categorize and recategorize and distinguish themselves all the time. When we have enough resources, that does not occur. When resource constraints emerge, a new definition of who should be at the table and who should not emerges. And unfortunately, at the level of the state, that discussion occurs with the framing of identity, and in terms of who came first, who came last, who should be here, who shouldn't be here. Is it women? Is it men? Is it younger people? Is it old people? Like you remember one time in Zambia, actually, they even queried the paternity of the ex-presidents who had been presidents for a long time. But one we were told was a Malawian and another one was a Congolese. But they had ruled, okay? Kaunda was queried, by Chiluba, who was also later on queried for being Malawian, and another one had been queried for being Congolese. So what you're seeing now is probably, if it is true that Rwanda is backing M23, probably what you're seeing is a group of people who feel with their own, or their own have called out to help, and there's need to pacify. Because we're talking about M23, but also the M23 people are talking about, complaining about FDLR. And it looks like FDLR does not also wish them well. So when you're marginalized and you're being persecuted like that, because you're not perceived to belong very well and fit, it's human that you'll seek where you'll find support. So if M23 is looking to the RPF for support, and if that is true, because we're told they are Ugandans, they are not Rwandese, so you have then that kind of problem. So I think this is a matter which the East African community needs to bring the two presidents together. I know the President Tshisekedi has said, I think he's not interested in these talks with certain parties on the table, but I think we cannot avoid this, and we need to discuss this question of nationhood of the Banyamulenge people, okay? And even if they are to remain in the DRC, how can they be made to belong, okay? And probably then they will stop looking externally for support. But that then goes back to the whole question of how do we redefine citizenship and nationhood within those countries that have big ethnic communities. In Uganda, we have somehow managed. In Kenya, they have somehow managed. But you see, sometimes these things also do spill out sometimes. But we are fairly contained. Do we have lessons to learn to the DRC, given that their ethnic communities are very many, but also very sparse, and that Kinshasa is very far? And so when these people feel marginalized and excluded and discriminated against, it's real. So they look to Uganda. That's why we are making growth for trade, because that's the nearest trade partner they have. They look to Rwanda for security. They can look elsewhere to so many things. So the talks must continue. I understand the grievances and the complexities, but there is no way around the talks. If the East African framework is seen as not very trusted, is it possible to look at the African Union as a framework of discussion?
You said lessons to be drawn from Uganda and Kenya, especially on the diversity of ethnicities that are there. What lessons would those be, and how would that bring that country back together?
We have always grown up thinking that Kenya was able to form a national identity of what it means to be Kenyan through the struggle for independence of Uhuru, the Mau Maus, and then the whole Uhuru's journey towards independence. And they was able to do that. Tanzania has also been able to do that through Ujamaa. Uganda, we didn't have those two, but over the last 40 years, we have been able to build what is fairly considered the Ugandan identity. The journey still continues. We are not at the level of what it means to be Kenyan and what it means to be Tanzanian, because when Ugandan talk about what it means to be Ugandan, it's done in a derogatory manner. in a disparaging manner, and we choose to celebrate the negatives, and we never amplify the positives. And when we come to amplifying the positives, we go tribal and ethnic or religious. But the journey continues. At least for the last few decades, we have been encouraged to temper down our differences and forge to one Uganda. And now I think with other forces coming in, like socioeconomic class, we are seeing people break ties with the tribe to actually create more cohesion and identify with their socioeconomic class. We hope that will continue, as long as it doesn't marginalize many poor people. But I think for DRC, it's like you don't seem to see that concerted effort. The effort you see is mobilization of a group of people against another group of people who, by the time the mobilization for Congolese identity is being done, it is being done juxtaposed against other people we should see as not Congolese. So I haven't seen a discussion of building a Congolese identity for who we are as Congolese people. All you see is these should get together because those are not. So you have communities within always being mobilized against another who who territorially are within the same state. So permanently those people will always be seen, will always perceive themselves as endangered. They will always make formations elsewhere for support until Congo has that discussion of who are we as a Congolese people. But also that goes beyond rhetoric to socioeconomic transformation, to economic development, to all of those things that citizens are supposed to enjoy within the state. Reduction of violence. Sometimes actually it may call for a reconstitution of their security forces. How nationalistic are they in terms of outlook? If they're also looking inward, then that will be a problem. And I know where Afande comes from, there's been a concerted effort to make them look nationalistic. So you cannot just behave carelessly wherever you are because the people you are working amongst are not yours. Whether they are yours or not yours, you have to create a Ugandan identity around things. So I think that in some of the readings, they are saying one of the things that may help restore peace in the DRC is reconstituting or reorganizing or reskilling the forces, and that's the police, the army, and the everything, to give them a national outlook, because they are fairly very tribal.
Thank you very much. Dr. David, Ibrahim Traore paid the debt for his country, has decided to rename some of the streets in his country to get that. He has also gone ahead to make sure that French is not the official language. When we come to DRC, I know the borders within Africa were demarcated by someone else that is not here now. The borders were demarcated by someone else. We point our fingers to colonialists, but we keep saying African problems with African solutions. For the question of DRC, where are the solutions? How do we get there?
Well, that's a whole cocktail of issues there. First of all, there is a very big fallacy with this African solution to African problem. I mean, talk about the Congo problem. The Congo problem is not a Congolese problem per se, and exclusively Congolese problem. This panel has fairly demonstrated it. So summoning Congolese solution to a problem that is already multifaceted and not only Congolese is already fallacious. So that I think should be clear. The borders that were made here, the idea that they were made by the colonialists, and then it's also a misanalysis. It's a misanalysis at a deeper level, because you want to look at this continent as if it was just a Garden of Eden, a tabula rasa, white people parachuted here, and then they did what they did, and then they moved on. I am a scholar of the border. I've spent a bigger part of my adult life now on the Congo-Uganda border. My entire doctoral research is on the Lubiria. I'm a borderlander. That has been all my life. I live a stone's throw away from Lubiria. I have a family stranded there, and I have studied the Rwenzori borderlands. It is not true that these borders were just made by Berlin, and it was not a top-down affair. It's not true. These borders have actually, we contributed actually to the demarcation here. There is a whole conversation about the meridian 30th degree on that border, as it was defined. But it kept shifting. Even as recent as the Nyamwasa phenomenon, that border is not fixed. The idea that the border is fixed, it keeps shifting. When we have waters coming from the melting snow there, the water push both Lubiria and Talia to different banks. Uganda keeps losing about 15 yards of territory, depending on the flows of the water in the first half of the year, and then it gets them back again in the fourth half of the year. So even literally speaking, the borders are not fixed, and they are not just a work of the Berlin Conference. And I think it's important to mention that so that we can bring back the African agency into the conversation. So what does that mean, therefore? That it is not true that we were just passive, hapless folks, disempowered, disinterested, and really overpowered by this imperial power. Definitely they were there, but my research actually shows that it has not been historically true that we were that lot at the receiving end of hegemony. We resisted it, we contributed to it, we plotted with it, we negotiated it, and it has been a field of negotiation. Which brings us now to your question of what ways forward can we think through our predicament? Our predicament is definitely within the realm of possibilities. My uncle here said that these things are solvable. And I want to come back to why they're solvable and the times we're inhabiting. First and foremost, this is perhaps the first time in a very long arc of time when Africa is perhaps most fortunate to reclaim its own destiny than any other time before since World War II. And this is my point. We're having a Security Council, the UN Security Council, at its weakest since its creation. Russia, as a member there, is exclusively focused on its existential war with Ukraine. The entire attention there has gone to Ukraine. We've gotten France that twice in a span of less than 6 months changed government. The French society, the French polity, and the French economy is in tatters that they cannot even hold together. Right now, there is even a vote of no confidence in the second change of government in France. We have the UK, which is suffering from its post-exit Brexit hangover. With if you look at the pound is dropping way beyond even the Swiss franc. This is unpredictable. This is really unprecedented. Let me get to China. China is at its biggest wars with US, the economic war. Honorable was in Beijing not so long ago. He can tell you about where China's biggest focus. They are looking at now Central Asia. They are looking at Latin America. They are looking at much of what you call the Middle East and Europe for its BRI initiative. Africa is really peripheral. Gets back to the big Uncle Sam. We have gotten Trump, who is now like an LC1 leader. For the first time in American politics, having a president who is navel-gazing. What does that speak to Africa? It means that we don't even have a Security Council worth looking up to. It is the biggest auspicious occasion ever given to history to be left alone. What are we doing? You saw the speech, even when M23 2012 was taking over Goma, the UN Security Council did something more than just what it did recently. What the whole UN Security Council on Monday afforded to do was, please, Tshisekedi government, please go and speak to the rebel. President Kagame, please stop supporting the rebel. That's the whole thing the entire world body organization could afford to do. The things like what we are doing on this panel, the UN Security Council behave worse than this panel. So what does it mean for the Congo conundrum? Is, look, Timothy, we know for a fact that there are so many other external forces commingling with internal forces, but we can organize the internal forces very well.
How?
How? The Congo, by the way, borders with 9 countries. It borders with 9 countries. So just to bounce off what Professor Sali has just said, it has a whole border with Central African Republic. It goes on for, the whole Ubangi River runs for about 150 kilometers of the border of Central African Republic. 150 kilometers of the border there. It borders about 400 kilometers with Congo Brazzaville. It borders about 200 kilometers with South Sudan now. It borders another 300 kilometers with Angola to the south. You have about 300 other kilometers with Zambia. You have a whole 400 kilometers with Tanzania. You've gotten about 120 kilometers with Uganda, then another 220 kilometers if you add them together, about 300 kilometers with Uganda. You've gotten about 150, you have gotten 50 kilometers with Burundi. And you have gotten the lake and then a road kilometers less than 100 with Rwanda. And the thorn in the flesh of the Congo stability has been with the 3 borders, but more significantly with the Rwandan border. So
that is the tree.
So one needs to ask, what is in it? The Rwandan state has had very strong legitimate claims as to why they cannot afford to just see Congo doing what it is doing with the post-genocide escapees and keep quiet. There's been an FDLR question since 1994. Congo says we've had since Laurent Kabila, the post-successions of the Kinyarwanda-speaking Congolese always refusing to be integral to the Congo. It has not happened with other borders there. So there is need maybe for not just an intra-Congolese dialogue. Let's have a very honest, Great Lakes speak, a kind of agenda that can transcend nation states. Let's speak to the region and eliminate reasons as to why one has legitimate reason or claims to get into the other one's territory.
But David,
and to do that,
there have been Great Lakes talks, East African talks, Angola. There have been peace talks everywhere. Why have they failed, and why do you think what you're suggesting can work?
Now, because the peace talks we have had peace in the liberal terms. That has been the biggest joke that we conceive of peace. We conceive of peace in the liberal terms of those who actually gave us the nation state. That's what do you mean by the talks which have happened? But let me tell you the talks which have happened. The talks which have happened, they have been characterized by 3 important features. The first feature is they are deeply apolitical. Mm-hmm. Apolitical in a sense that you just put all other political issues aside. When we say issues, we mean that this is a violence that is being driven by issues. There are some stakes that are being driven, which are making this violence to go on. The talks we have had all the way from perhaps the most consequential talk which we had was the Sun City talks. And we saw the value of that Sun City talk by 4 years. After Goma Accord, 2008, to we had the Nairobi Pact, 2010, Dar es Salaam coming in there, 2013, via Kampala, 2012, to Kampala 2, Kampala 3, Kampala 4. We've got Nairobi 1 and 2, Luanda 1 and 2. The talks have been deeply apolitical. It is an art of pushing aside issues and sticking to the grammar of togetherness, let's forge a content, let's unite. That's the first problem. We have not had peace talks that are really talks of the drivers of the violence. The second features which those talks have had, they have been so much consumed by the humanitarian concern. There have been the humanitarian impetus has has glossed over the political stakes of that conflict, because it is political because it is driven by issues and it has the constituencies. Who eventually forms the talk and all that is, no, people have died so much, we should stop this because bloodshed, it is bad scenery, it is bad publicity, it is bad PR, it is, and because of that whole thinking with the heart, we have just buried the head. That's the humanitarian challenge to this liberal peace agenda. And the third thing is that we think that peace is an event whereby, you know, people have gone, they have signed under the peace, that eventually President Tshisekedi met with President Kagame in Nairobi. We can call off this show. Behind the headlines can be called off because we eventually got there. The idea of peace as an event, and yet peace is actually that present continuous tense that needs to be, you know, the grammar of peace is about, it's in the forging.
Okay.
And unless we have a talk that A, repoliticizes the issue, D, contaminates the humanitarianism, and 3, starts by looking at it as a process that peace has to be nurtured, kept, watered, sustained by an idea not to ever go back to war. We cannot. And those talks have never been framed that. They're always time framed, they're time bound, they have these so-called SMART objectives.
Thank you. General Kulaije, you as a senior security person, when you look at this situation, Goma down, the escalation in Kinshasa yesterday, especially to our embassy and the various embassies there, what confidence do you give a Ugandan who is watching? Because about 3 questions came out there, concerned about the confidence you can give us as the military on our safety.
You may have noticed, for you, reading the questions, but Dr. Chiunganda is smiled at the question of how I can guarantee or talk about the security of Ugandans that are inside the Congo. It just shows you lack of information on what exactly the Congo looks like. Kinshasa is 2,000 kilometers from here. Okay? So Ugandan who is in Kinshasa can only be accounted for by Ugandan embassy, which was attacked. A Ugandan who is in Goma would be accounted for by indeed either the Congolese or MONUSCO, because we do not have a force. We have an office, a liaison office, which at one point, by the way, the Congolese had closed with those kind of accusations. And what worries me is that if a Ugandan can think like that about his own country, what about a common Congolese that has had this rhetoric from some of the leaders inside that country? I had a debate with a member of the Senate from North Kivu, who is a Mnyarwanda speaker, but that is not part of the M23 ethnic group. And his talk was very venomous. Very venomous. You could hear the man hating his fellow Nyarwanda, but just because the physical features are different. The ethnization of the violence in Eastern Congo falls short of being the actual genocide that we saw in Rwanda in 1994. But you see, in my view, those are simply symptoms of a problem. When people fail to address the real causes of the problem, they must look for scapegoats. And for me, like I said, a genuine discussion of these things by first and foremost the nationals themselves. See, Uganda is an example. We were in conflict for 24 years, and then plus 20 in northern Uganda and the northeastern Uganda. That makes them 44. How have we managed to deal with this? It was not through external actors. We looked at this problem squarely. But But Uganda's lack was a leadership that had the correct lenses of understanding the issues, dealing with them politically, and where it failed, the military approach was used. But it was the last approach. It was the last resort rather. Similarly, in all African countries, if there is a lack of local capacity to understand the issues and deal with them squarely, you will always have a vacuum and to be exploited by negative forces. You yourself said there are 120. There are actually 136 negative forces in DRC. And you see, the talk is about M23 alone, as if once M23 puts down their guns, the problem has been solved. And the answer is no. To the north, you have the Hemaland conflict, which again, I witnessed when I was in Ituri myself, where we enabled the Lendo and the Hema to sit together on a radio station, and they confessed that since the earth was created, the two communities had never sat in one room. And these are people who live together. They could never. But because we were the big brother at that time, in 2002, 2003, they agreed, and because I told them, come and talk to each other what the problem is, instead of killing each other. And they had just massacred 1,000 people in Drodro, on the other side of Lake Albert. So the issues we are talking about are about, as Dr. Chionga put it, huge losses of lives. And we cannot continue seeing this happening. And when I hear questions like people from Honorable Ken Chams who sought to lead this country, and they're saying Uganda has no business being in Congo, I worry about the future of this country. That if those are people who want to lead our country, and they reason that way, they think you can only be here in a cocoon and you are safe, it's daydreaming. His own language says when your neighbor's house has fire, has caught fire, your house is not safe. It's a traditional African wisdom that many of us who put on ties and have gone to school fail to appreciate. Lastly, we have a duty as Pan-Africanists. We have an obligation to help our brothers and sisters also enjoy peace. Now, when as he said the African solution to African problems is a fallacy, I don't think it's a fallacy. The only weakness, in my view, is our inability to put money where our mouths are. We are talking of these problems, are we able to finance them? You can be sure everybody is telling you the template of AMISOM in Somalia is the best on the continent to deliver peace. What is its weakness? Financing. We have to depend on the European Union. They have their own problems, as you pointed out. And so they give you timelines, not based on the situation, but based on their pockets. Thirdly, you cannot be, like I mentioned earlier, in a conflict zone and you do not get interest in other people's situations so that you help them if they are willing. Because the first point, they must be willing to listen. Otherwise, we are going to continue lamenting, adding another chapter on the book of Lamentations in the Bible, and solve nothing.
Thank you very much. Lastly, Dr. Crispus, the situation in the DRC, could it spill over into Uganda? But also, when do we start walking the talk?
Yes, you see, as I said before, if there is a conflict anywhere in Africa, the rest of Africa suffers in one way or another. In terms of spilling into Uganda, yes, there is a possibility. It's not so far. It's hardly 600 kilometers from our border. And if you see what happened in Kinshasa, there was a problem in Goma. People are burning an embassy. You see? So some people could get a perception that maybe Uganda is involved. They lose their relatives there. They say, oh, Uganda is the one which has killed our people, and they could react badly. So, as I said, wherever there is a problem in Africa, other Africans, wherever they are in Africa, should feel concerned and intervene in one way or the other. So it's not time for us to sleep. And the way forward really is a deep, first stop the fighting, we find some method to halt the fighting so that people don't die, and then we engage in a deep dialogue on that situation.
Thank you very much. Let me read some messages and then I'll give you parting shots. Good evening, this is Fred. I would like just to say Congo is too large. Its constitution is weak. So Congo could need a cessation. Okay? Good evening, Timothy and the panelists. Can any of the panelists speak to the reason for the establishment of the capital of Congo as Kinshasa, nearly 1,580 from the mineral-rich northern Kivu? The management of this conflict, was it intentional by the colonialists to aid illegal activities at this distance? Does this distance in managing such civil conflicts cause its problem? This is George from Uganda. Okay. DRC under the command of the Colonel Ndala had M23 out of Goma and to the borders of Uganda and Rwanda. It was only after killing the Colonel in 2014 that M23 resurrected. Okay. Good evening, Timothy. Thank you for today's panel and today's topic. Personally, I concur with the professor's presentation. Surely Congo is a failed state. I can believe a government sitting in a comfort zone in Kinshasa, leaving the mineral-rich areas in the hands of foreigners with no connection with the central administration. In fact, what is happening there is a scramble for minerals by different foreign groups. Thank you. Okay. Major General Kulaije, we have been reading tweets in Uganda by Uganda's CDF about Congo, where his account is hacked into, or does he have it as personal? What impact is that having to our relationship with Congo? Okay. Lastly but not least, the VIP panelists, especially the newest general, hopefully his promotion was not communicated on X by the CDF. M23 rebels in DRC, Uganda government should clean and clear all allegations to support the rebels destabilizing Congo. Many of them have been seen in Kampala, renting expensive apartments in Muyenga, others up marketplaces, driving DRC registered number plates, selling gold around, and Ugandan authorities have no problem under the pretext that they are buying from us, and therefore can we hide them in our cities? Quite a very lengthy one. You go on about Idi Amin and all these things. This is Dan Masiko Malcolm. You tell us what your hopeful is. Lastly, Mwesigwa Timothy Ntare says, I think the African Union and the leadership of the African countries should come together to see how humanitarian crisis can be resolved, instead of depending on Western aid like the UN in order to revamp African sovereignty. Otherwise, the UN is just toothless and a barking dog with no bite. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Number of messages that have come through. Thank you very much for your messages. Someone sends a message that I need to read particularly, and he says, please tell the Chancellor that I am Abu Baker from Pondwe Kasese. Dr. Chiyonga has articulated well. We want him back as our MP in Busongora West. I have passed on the message as I was asked. I will start with the Professor. I'll go to Dr. David, General Kulaije, and finally Dr. Chiyonga for your parting shots in a minute each.
Yes, thank you very much, Timothy, and our viewers. There was a question which asked why the capital city is located where it is.
Yes.
Yeah, we have to remember that many of the cities to many African states that are on the periphery, on the outside, were actually located on seas, on coastlines because of trade. And to remind ourselves that what the foreigners wanted from Africa was actually easy access to these resources. So you have Lagos, you have Accra, you have Dakar, you have Rwanda, you have Cape Town, so the Tunis, Cairo, Dar es Salaam. There are very few countries that actually their cities were in the internal. Of course, like Addis Ababa, it fought the Italians. The cities up there. Uganda was, the rest of us were internal, our cities are internal. You can't talk much about it. But most of those that bordered the big oceans, their cities were there. But also like for the Congo, of course, it was easier to transport things from the river Congo, all the way down to where these cities are. And of course, we have, you have that, what is the other thing which belongs to Angola? No, within Kinshasa. It used to be a nickname for Nkrumah.
Kabinda.
Kabinda enclave, sorry. So you have that, but you see, that is how the cities came up. And that shows you that state building in Africa was not just a political process. It was also an economic process. Infrastructure was organized around that. And going back to the discussion we are discussing today, okay, we get independence, and there's a lot of reorganization to do. And reminding ourselves of what Nkrumah said, if we do not organize the economic question, the colonials are going to come back as in form of aid, in form of imperialism, and recolonize us. Yes. So Congo got independence. First and foremost, we are sad with what we are seeing there. But we have to begin forging a way of ending what has been there. It's not enough to settle in Kinshasa. There's need to make the people elsewhere belong. So development is going to be very important to resolving the Congolese problem, whether it's political or socio-economic, because politics simply comes to organize the economics. And why is this important? Of course, as Africans, we always want to pride in saying we are the richest country, we have a lot of natural resources. Our white colleagues, when we are having this joke, are always quick to remind us that you have the resources, but you cannot go there and get them because you lack the infrastructure. To put people down into a gold mine, and most gold occurs around 2 kilometers below the ground, you need a lot of infrastructure we don't need, because breathing stops at around 500 meters. So for you to put men down there and they breathe needs a lot of infrastructure, a lot of oxygen, a lot of things we don't need. So if we are to use the natural resources of Congo to develop the Congolese people, Congo needs to begin talking a question of how do you meaningfully extract these resources and get the infrastructure to get enough quantities, not artisanal things controlled by vigilante forces, but real minerals out, and to use it to develop the people. If that does not happen, we shall be here again to discuss the Congo crisis.
Thank you very much. Dr. David.
Well, you know, some time back, Timothy, a question was asked in 1993 to a group of experts like these ones we have here about predictions of the African continents moving forward. Remember in December 1993, and speculations were on the table, and scenario builders have mapped up eventualities. And then they said, well, there will be a genocide on this continent and there will be reconciliation on this continent. Could you guess in 1993 the answers around the room? There were all signs, very clear signs that South Africa was going down the path of genocide. Chris Hani has died, Sharpeville is in tatters, Soweto is ungovernable, KwaZulu-Natal has broken off. It was conspicuous that we shall see, and this was the most insightful expert of the time. We are going to see genocide in South Africa. December 1993, if you remember very well your readings of the Great Lakes, Arusha Accord have just taken place. Abiyarimana has signed the peace accord with the RPF. There was the biggest spark of hope to bring the civil war to an end, and all signs showed that Rwanda is moving toward reconciliation. And 4 months down the road, there was reconciliation in the south. and at the heart of Africa there was a genocide. What are we missing? What are we missing as Goma, the most geostrategic city of the Great Lakes region, and perhaps the most geopolitical epicenter of the region, is exploding? The explosion is sending in a lot of smoke and fog in the eyes of analysts that we are missing something. As Goma goes into the flames and it sends us fogs, the most important question will be, responding to some of the comments here, there's all signs that Congo is on its highway to the long, historically postponed balkanization, secession, breakaway. All signs are there. And that other states neighboring them, they're on the highway to consolidation and solidification and much more hegemony. My example of Rwanda, South Africa seems to suggest something else.
Very interesting analogy there. General.
It's more that the use of the word highway to balkanization, and that's unfortunately the likelihood. Yet we are talking of integration, as Dr. Chionga put it, because integration gives you a bigger entity within which to deal with some of these questions that would lose the national significance of being people identifying themselves according to ethnicity. Again, it comes back to utilization of resources. But when we are talking about Congo, I think we lose sight of historical fact. There are two things I want to point out here. One, the historical fact. The Congolese were given only 5 months to organize for independence. 5 months by the Belgians. At the time, there were only 3 graduates in that country. Who was going to lead? And no wonder Lumumba invites a sergeant, Mobutu, who was on a course in France, in Belgium rather, to come and lead the army. A sergeant is supposed to manage 30 soldiers. Manage, not even command. But that you are bringing him to command the national army. The rest is history, is what happened. So there was no effort to build state capacity, capability for a state, so to speak. The consequences were those. And as a result, because of the masters, whom some people want to exonerate, you have airports and the airfields in DRC minus roads.
Okay. Thank you. Lastly, Doctor. Yes.
Sorry, the last point out to give in is that you cannot afford to ignore the Congo question. Somebody said the map of Africa is the shape of a revolver and the trigger is Congo.
We'll leave it at that. Dr. Chionga, lastly.
Well, first, really that fighting must stop. We should not lose any more lives in Goma and the surrounding areas. And our leaders in the region, in the East African community, in SADC, have the duty to ensure that. It is critical this time around that a deep dialogue is initiated on this question of what has led to the crisis in Goma. I don't know what has happened to the formations we've given ourselves as Africa, including regional brigades, with clear formulation that if there is a crisis in place X, these brigades should be brought into action. I don't know what has happened. It has let us down. And finally, I think all our institutions, beginning with universities, must teach the appropriate form of political economy to our young people.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen and lady, thank you very much for gracing and coming here. The technical team behind it that has made today possible, thank you very much. We apologize for some of the glitches in sound. We also apologize that Honorable Norbert Mao could not make it because of one reason or the other. But today we're going to do it different. We're going to pray for Congo. Lord, we thank you for the DRC and we thank you for Africa as a continent. Father, you are interested in this country and this nation. I pray that, Lord, you bring healing in the hearts, first of men and women, but also you restore sanity and peace in that country. Father, even with everything we have discussed, you reign supreme. I pray that that country will settle and you will reign supreme in it. We thank you and we bless you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you very much for joining us and have a good morning.
UBC, inspiring Uganda. Here's your chance to win school fees for your child for a whole year. Just pay school fees using Momo. Dial *165 *80#. Select option 2 for school pay. Select option 1 to pay school fees. Enter the student number and amount and approve the transaction. You will now enter the draw to win school fees.
This is Uganda in 1986 and now. In 1986, the total hydropower generation in the country was a paltry 60 megawatts, generated from the old and dilapidated Owen Falls hydropower station from River Nile in eastern Uganda. The power station had been commissioned in 1954 to generate 150 megawatts. Old age and lack of spare parts led to frequent mechanical breakdown. By 1986, the station could barely run for 6 hours non-stop.
Keeping force, it has always been belligerent in mandate. The attacks on Rwanda by some South African officials necessitate a response. The role of the South African National Defence Force in the DRC has never been clearer. To side with and protect Congolese President Tshisekedi, his genocidal allies, the FDLR, his many local militias and his European mercenaries.